What is up, guys, and welcome back. I put together a DLC checklist that's going to cover all builds no matter what your playstyle is. I'm going to go over all of the gear that you need for each build before heading into the DLC. If this video helps you in your preparation for the DLC, do us a solid and smash that like button. And if you want to see more of our guides, then feel free to subscribe. Now I'm going to change up my regular order a little bit on this because I think that talismans are the most important thing to cover on this guide. Talismans basically give you 4 permanent offensive or defensive buffs. First, I'm going to cover the one that I think every build should have in their inventory, and then I'm going to cover build-specific talismans. Everyone should be using the Ritual Sword Talisman. This gives you a 10% damage increase as long as your HP is full. This one's very simple to get. All you need to do is go to Altus Plateau, kill Demi-Human Queen Gillica, and pick up the talisman from the chest behind her. No matter what build you're playing, you're probably using skills, and therefore you should have the Shard of Alexander. This increases the damage of all skills by 15%. And to get this, you need to do Alexander's questline, but you really only need to do these mandatory steps. You need to talk to him after killing Radahn, talk to him in the lava at Mount Gelmir, and then agree to duel him up in Crumbling Fire Missoula and defeat him. Those are the only mandatory steps in his questline, and he'll give you the Shard of Alexander at the end. This talisman is very strong, especially given how strong some skills are in the game. Like, for example, I was able to one-shot the Fire Giant with one swing of Carrion Grandeur at level 1. So don't sleep on skills in Elden Ring. For those newer players or people that are looking for more of a defensive buff, the Erdtree's Favorite +2 is a great option. This is just ground loot in the Ashen Capital, and it raises your HP by 4%, stamina by 10%, and equip load by 8%. It's a good choice for a defensive talisman. Probably the best defensive talisman in Elden Ring is the Dragoncrest Great Shield Talisman. This reduces all physical damage by 20%. Now to get this, go to Erdtree and go to the building where you would take the elevator down to fight Malenia, and you just drop in from the roof and it's in a chest on the upper level. The Godfrey Icon is a great offensive talisman for any build in the game. It gives you 15% more damage on any charge, spell, or skill. You can pick this up from the Everjail right next to the Grand Lift of Dectus. All you need to do is enter the Everjail and kill Godfroy, and he'll drop you the Godfrey Icon. Now 15% is a huge damage modifier for a talisman, and some of the highest damage spells and skills in the game happen to be charged. Like, for example, Ancient Dragon Lightning Strike is a charged spell, so by stacking this talisman with other offensive talismans, you can get absurd damage. I want to quickly touch on the Greatjar's Arsenal because I see a lot of people recommending this. I want to say that I think that this is pretty much worthless in PvE, because in PvE we can hit that 51 poise breakpoint with relatively low endurance and low weight armor. And I'll cover more on that stuff in the armor section, but I basically wanted to say that I think that this is a waste of one of your 4 valuable talisman slots. Now that obviously changes drastically for PvP, but for PvE you get a lot more survivability using something like the Dragoncrest Great Shield Talisman, rather than wearing a slightly heavier armor. Now for mages, I would highly recommend, in addition to the other talismans, the Magic Scorpion Charm. This increases all magic damage by 12%, and you get this for helping Celavis. Now you don't have to complete his full questline and betray Ranni, you just need to do the beginning. There's a fairly quick way to get through this. You just go to Celavis, take the potion, give it to Gideon to dispose of the potion, head back and lie to Celavis and tell him you gave Nefeli the potion and buy any of his spells that you may want. Then just explore the basement below the hidden ruins nearby. He's going to offer you a puppet. You're going to take the Jarrite puppet. This is the more expensive of the 2 puppets. Then you just need to go and grab 2 Starlight shards before going back and buying another puppet. I recommend while you're out and about just grabbing the Amber Starlight as well. Then just go back and buy the Finger Maiden puppet and give him the Amber Starlight. At this point, he'll give you the Magic Scorpion Charm. The other must-have talisman for any mage is the Graven Mass Talisman. This increases the damage of all your sorceries by 8%, and to get this, you just use the Fanged Imp Ashes to solve the puzzle at the Rise and Consecrated Snowfield. Then it's just in a chest at the top of the Rise. This week's video is sponsored by Factor. Like us, you may be surprised to find out that Factor is now owned by HelloFresh. And I can now tell you from personal experience that the result was fantastic. And I think when most of us think of Factor, we think of dinner, but they actually have you covered on every meal, including breakfast. As someone who normally meal preps for the entire week, it was great to have a meal that was ready in 2 minutes that was absolutely delicious with no mess and no cleanup. This saved me a ton of time, which is a resource that I'm always finding myself lacking. Between keeping on top of my daytime profession, being a dad to our young children, and trying to keep YouTube content consistently coming out for you guys, I'm always trying to find ways to optimize my schedule to get a little time back. Not only do Factor meals come in clutch in that area, but they're also delicious. So head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code Titus1Shot50 to get 50% off your first Factor box and 20% off your next month of orders. That's code Titus1Shot50 at factor75.com to get 50% off your first box, plus 20% off your next month of orders. Thanks again, Factor. Now back to the checklist, picking back up on talismans for physical builds. Now for physical builds, on top of our base 5, I recommend the Spear Talisman. This will increase your pierce counterattack damage by 15%, and this is just ground loot in a chest in the Lakeside Crystal Cave over in Liurnia. Definitely use this if you have a pierce damage weapon. Another great talisman for physical builds would be the Axe Talisman. This increases the damage of your charged attacks by 10%, and you're probably doing a lot of charged attacks if you're a physical build. And this talisman's also ground loot. All you need to do is head to the Mistwood Ruins, go down to the cellar, and it's in a chest down there. Now if you're running a bleed build, there's a couple other great options to add in. The Claw Talisman raises the damage of your jump attacks by 15% and it stacks with the Raptor's Black Feathers. And this is ground loot on a corpse on top of a tower in Stormvale Castle. To get there, just reference the video in the top right hand corner. Every bleed build should be running the Lord of Blood's Exaltation. This increases all of your damage by 20% for 20 seconds every time that you proc a bleed, and you should be constantly proccing bleeds. And this is a reward for killing Esgar. He's at the end of the Lindell Catacombs underneath the capital. Millicent's Prosthesis gives you 5 dexterity and increases the damage of successive attacks by 4, 6, and then 11%. You don't have to do her full quest to get this. You can actually use a shortcut where you do her quest up to the point of moving her to Windmill Village, and then if you kill her there after killing the Godskin Apostle, she'll drop Millicent's Prosthesis there, saving you having to go all the way to Haligtree for it. Now the counterpart to this talisman would be the Rotten Winged Sword insignia, and this increases the damage of successive attacks by 6, 8, and 13%. In order to get this one though, you actually have to finish her quest line, you have to get summoned in Haligtree, help her out, and then she'll give you the Rotten Winged Sword insignia. Stacking all of these together will give you absolutely monstrous damage. My wife Emberborn and I are putting out a build video on her channel where we're going to go over and rank the best builds for starting the DLC, and I fully expect Bleed to be near the very top of that list. Now, if you're running a lightning build, you need to grab the Lightning Scorpion Charm. This increases all your lightning damage by 12%. Now this is ground loot not very far into Windham Catacombs, so just kill the knight and make your way up the ladder behind him and use a stone sword key and you'll see the Lightning Scorpion Charm on the ground. If you're running a lightning build, odds are that you're using incantations, so you should be using the Phlox Canvas Talisman as well. This increases the damage of all incantations by 8%, and there's actually a shortcut to getting this very early in the game. Just give the unalloyed gold needle to Millicent and then kill her, and then go back to Gowrie Shack and kill him and he'll drop the Phlox Canvas Talisman. Be sure to also use this in your fire and holy builds. Now for a pyromancer, in addition to what we've covered, you should be using the Fire Scorpion Charm. This will increase all of your fire damage by 12%. It's also very easy to get to. It's just ground loot on the upper level of the ramparts at Fort Lade on a wooden platform to the west. The same theory applies to holy builds. You should add in the Sacred Scorpion Charm. This will increase all of your holy damage by 12%. This talisman is dropped by Anastasia during her invasion at the Smoldering Church in Caelid. You can actually run wide around the outside and grab the Sight of Grace before fighting her just in case. A great talisman for a quick buff before boss fights for extra damage would be Kindred of Rot's Exaltation. This increases all of your damage by 20% for 20 seconds after poison occurs in your vicinity. This is dropped by the Kindred of Rot duo boss in the Seethwater Cave. And the easiest way to proc this is just self-poisoning with fetid pots, and this stacks multiplicatively with the Lord of Blood's Exaltation. And these don't fall into a buff category, so you can add this onto any build. And if you really wanted to push it, these stack with the White Mask and Mushroom Crown. Now when it comes to armor, just like we talk about in all of our other build guides, the only real concern in PvE is hitting that 51 poise breakpoint. Now, as Margit demonstrated, below 51 poise, you're going to get interrupted on your attacks left and right. But with at least 51 poise, you're going to be able to attack through at least one normal attack from most enemies in Elden Ring. And these are my favorite efficient armor sets that I use in PvE. Up first would be the Knight Cavalry set, but replacing the helmet with the Black Knife Hood. You get this set from defeating the dual Knight Cavalry boss over in Consecrated Snowfield. This set normally has 53 poise. When we replace the helmet with the Black Knife Hood, we're still at the 51 poise breakpoint, but we shed a lot of weight. The Black Knife Hood is very easy to get to. It's just ground loot under the back staircase in Ordina. The entire Black Knife set is there, but you only need the hood. The next set I frequently use would be Blide's set with the Black Knife Hood. This is another great looking set that we can use to hit our 51 poise breakpoint. And to get this armor, you have to do Ronnie's complete quest line. And then unfortunately, as cool as Blythe is, we have to kill him at the end of this quest line to get this armor. He basically goes crazy at the end of her quest line, so you fight him at the end and he'll drop the entire set. Now this set actually gives you 60 poise, but without the helmet you still have 51 poise, giving you a ton of flexibility. So if you're unfamiliar with Ronnie's questline, I'm going to give you a quick rundown. All you need to do is start the quest by going over and initially meeting her at Ronnie's Rise. Then you just kill Radahn and she's going to send you down to pick up the Fingerslayer blade. Then just head back to Ronnie's Rise and give that to her and she's going to move. Head through Ainsel River towards the Lake of Rot and you're going to kill the Baleful Shadow. Then go to the Academy and grab the Dark Moon Ring. Then return to the Lake of Rot and kill Estelle. And at this point, Crazy Blythe should be outside Ronnie's Rise. Now I thought this paired very well with the Black Knife Hood. But since you already have 51 poise, you can either not wear a helmet or wear any helmet that you want here. Now when it comes to full sets that give exactly 51 poise, I think that Malekith's is one of the best looking sets. I used this on our Death Mage and I really liked it, aside from the fact that obviously you get it a little later in the game. This set gives you exactly 51 poise and it's very straightforward to acquire. All you need to do is kill Malekith and then you can go back and purchase the entire set at the Round Table Hold. But if you're looking for the best armor in the game in terms of weight to poise ratio with 51 poise, it's actually the Fingerprint set. This set gives you 51 poise while only weighing 25.3. This complete set is also very straightforward to acquire. All you need to do is make your way over to the mountaintops of the Giants, head into the Everjail right next to the Frozen Lake, and then just kill Vike and he'll drop the entire set. These are my favorite sets, but obviously there's hundreds of combinations of armor pieces that'll work. All you need to do is make sure that you hit at least 51 poise, and from there, just do whatever you think looks the best. These are just some easy to reach options that I wanted to provide. A good example of this mix and matching on a jump attack bleed build would be something like this. The Raptor's Black Feather and the White Mask for their buffs, and then filling in to hit that 51 poise with the Elden Lord Bracers and the Bull Goat Greaves. Now because this is a DLC prep video, we're going to approach the buff section from an endgame point of view. The first body buff that I recommend is Howl of Shabriri. This is in a chest on the second level of the Frenzy Flame Tower, and this increases all of your damage no matter the type by 25% for 40 seconds. So this is the go-to buff if you use any sort of elemental damage. Blood Boil aromatics are craftable, but you can pick up the recipe on a chair on the roof of the Shaded Castle, and this is the best physical damage body buff in Elden Ring. This increases all physical damage by 30% for 60 seconds. So basically, to simplify this, if you're doing any sort of elemental damage or you're casting spells that are not physical damage, you should be using Howl of Shabriri. Otherwise, if you're doing physical damage, you should be using Blood Boil Aromatic. I will quickly touch on Flame Grant Me Strength, and I think that it's just outclassed by Blood Boil for physical builds and Howl of Shabriri for anything else. As it buffs physical and fire damage by 20%, it's just not as good as the other two buffs. With the low faith requirement, it is a decent early game buffing option, but that's not what we're talking about here, so it's just outclassed. Now, if you have at least 16 strength, you can two-hand the Commander Standard, and it's the best aura buff in Elden Ring. This increases all of your damage and damage negation by 20% for 30 seconds. And this is just dropped by Commander O'Neill and Khalid. I highly recommend this as your aura buff. However, there is another good option for an aura buff if you have a high faith build, and that's Golden Vow, which you just pick up as ground loot in the Corpse Den Shack up in Mount Gelmir. Now this increases all of your damage by 15% and damage negation by 10% for 80 seconds, but has a 25 faith requirement. Basically, my rule of thumb is if I have at least 16 strength and I can two-hand the Commander Standard, that's what I use as my aura buff. But if you're on a low strength, high faith build, then Golden Vow is a good option as well. The Golden Vow Ash of War to me is just not worth mentioning at this point in the game. The other two aura buffs are better and you should be able to use one or the other. When it comes to weapon buffs, your first choice if you're trying to one-shot something is always going to be Royal Knight's Resolve. This is going to give you 80% more damage on your next attack. And this is ground loot in Volcano Manor next to a fire behind that first locked door when you come in. If there's a bleedable enemy, then the best weapon buff in the game is hands down Seppuku. Seppuku adds 30 flat physical damage to your weapon and then 30 base bleed buildup that scales with Arcane. The amount of DPS that Seppuku adds to your weapons is insane. If you're fighting an enemy that cannot bleed, I highly recommend using Cragblade. Cragblade increases the physical damage by 15% and poise damage by 10% for 60 seconds on your weapon. And this is dropped by the Teardrop Scarab just before the Great Bridge and Khalid. So for weapon buffs, if you're trying to one-shot something, use Royal Knight's Resolve. If you're trying to get the maximum possible damage per second and the enemy can bleed, use Seppuku. And if you're trying to get the highest possible damage per second and the enemy can't bleed, then use Cragblade. Terra Magica doesn't fall into a category, so it stacks with all the other buffs. And this creates a blue glyph on the ground, and while you're standing in it, it increases all of your magic damage by 35%. And this is in a chest on top of a tower accessible by an elevator, after defeating the Crystallian Duo boss in the Academy Crystal Cave. If your build does fire damage, you should be using the Flame Shroud and Crack tier. This increases all of your fire damage by 20% for 3 minutes. This is dropped by the Putrid Avatar found at the minor Erdtree in Caelid. If your build focuses on magic damage, then you want to be using the Magic Shroud and Crack tier. This increases all of your magic damage by 20% and is dropped by the Erdtree Avatar found at the minor Erdtree in northeast Liurnia. If your build focuses on lightning damage, then you should be using the Lightning Shroud and Crack tier. This increases lightning damage by 20% for 3 minutes and is also dropped by the Erdtree Avatar found at the minor Erdtree in northeast Liurnia. And if your build focuses on holy damage, then you should be using the Holy Shroud and Crack tier, which raises holy damage by 20% for 3 minutes, and this is also dropped by the Erdtree Avatar found at the minor Erdtree in northeast Liurnia. If you're running a dual element build, then be sure to just swap these crack tiers out as needed. Any build can benefit from the Opaline Bubble tier. This raises your damage negation by 90% for 3 minutes until you're hit. So basically it gives you a bubble that can absorb one hit without you really taking any damage. I think this will be very valuable with the very high damage DLC bosses. If you're running a build that attacks very quickly like a Curved Sword Bleed build or a Dagger build, then you want to use the Thorny Crack tier. This is going to increase the power of successive attacks by 9, 13, and 20%. And this will stack with the Millicent's Prosthesis and the Rotten Wing Sword Insignia. When it comes to consumables, there's a ton of them out there. These are the only ones that I think are mandatory for your build heading into the DLC. Now the most important consumable and one that every build will benefit from is the Sleep Pot. You can pick up this recipe in the graveyard just southeast from the Summonwater Village outskirts. And with bosses, basically if this works, use it. It has a base of 29 sleep buildup that scales with Arcane, and this can make some of the hardest boss fights in the game absolutely trivial. And it allows you to set up for some pretty incredible boss kills. If you're using a fire-based build, you should be using oil pots. The recipe for these can be purchased from the abandoned merchant in Siafa River for 1,000 runes. And hitting an enemy with this will increase the next fire damage attack they take by 50%. This is a massive damage boost that any Pyromancer build should be taking advantage of. Basically, you just throw an oil pot at an enemy before hitting them with a fire attack, and they'll take 50% more damage from that fire attack. Freezing pots are another consumable that really every build can benefit from. Freezing pot causes 380 frost buildup, and enemies debuffed with frostbite will take 20% more damage. The recipe for these is in the Caria Manor, and it's in the room to the very southeast corner of the manor. Fetid pots are a great way to quickly poison yourself to proc your Kindred of Rot and Mushroom Crown buffs. And the recipe for these is just ground loot. It's on a corpse near the bear in Mistwood. And this is hard to miss because it's right along the main path that goes through Mistwood. I want to give a big shout out to our patrons, and as usual for those of you on Patreon, there's going to be a PDF written checklist guide for this linked in the description below. Here's a list of the quests that give Ancient Dragon Smithing Stones in case you may have missed one. And then here's a list of the quests that give Somber Ancient Dragon Smithing Stones in case you missed one of those. Now I think there's a few other additional items that you should consider before heading to the DLC. I would personally make sure that you have the Smithing Stone Miners Bell Bearings 1 through 4, the Somberstone Miners Bell Bearings 1 through 5, the Glovewort Pickers Bell Bearings 1 through 3, and the Ghost Glovewort Pickers Bell Bearings 1 through 3 as well. Then I would utilize those and I would purchase a handful of each Smithing Stone, each Somber Smithing Stone, and then a few Grave and Ghost Gloveworts. I would also go back and pick up any Somber and regular Ancient Dragon Smithing Stones that you missed. This will give you the flexibility to upgrade new Spirit Ashes and weapons in the DLC. Also, I would go back and pick up any Golden Seeds and Sacred Tears you may have missed and max your flask out because of the difficulty of the DLC. If you use spells, I would also go back and grab any Memory Stones that you may have missed. We don't know yet if we're going to need Stone Sword Keys, but I would grab a couple extra Stone Sword Keys just in case for the DLC. And then make sure that you have any of the wet blades that you need for your damage type. And that's it guys, so if you follow this checklist, your character's going to be ready to dominate the Shadow of the Erdtree. Be sure to smash that like button on your way out, and check back next week for a really cool project that we've been working on for months that I'm really excited to share with you guys. Stay dangerous.